guys, and welcome to my Walking Dead weekly chat video for the mid-season premiere. I was not entirely thrilled whenever I do these videos. I rewatch the episode, I take a lot of notes and all of that, and I was not excited to rewatch this. But weirdly, I do believe that this was my favorite episode of the season so far. But, yeah, I was not was not excited about rewatching it and crying again, which I did. It was great. Yeah, so I'm just gonna get right into it. I feel like I have a lot to say, and you know, I'm trying not to make these videos ridiculously long, but I don't succeed at that. So the first thing, I'm gonna talk about everything that's kind of not Carl related first. They did keep kind of going back and forth. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was Gavin. And if you see me looking down, it's because my notes are down here. So it was kind of interesting, the kind of course that Gavin's character took. I was always a big fan of Gavin. I don't know how you guys felt about him. It was weird because I feel like this episode gave a lot of insight into Gavin's character, you know, that we never really got before. In previous episodes, I feel like we kind of saw that he was a very, what's the best way to put it? I mean, he was a very, probably of the saviors, maybe somebody that you think is a little more rational. Maybe you thought that he was kind. And it was really interesting to see a lot of language that Gavin used in this episode. I felt really focused on the fact that he really does think that the worst fate is death. And I think that it was really interesting that we kind of saw that there's like kind of two types of people. And like when we first met Dwight, back when we first met him with Daryl, and Dwight said something to the effect of, not going to get it word for word, but he said something to the effect of the fact that, like, you know, some people, as if they're protected, and they have this like insurance that they don't die, then they're really fine with kneeling and doing whatever. God, I really wish that I could remember the exact quote, but it was something like that where he was talking about it. And I think that that's kind of the difference between maybe the people who work, you know, under Negan. You know, Eugene's a decent example of that. You know, he just doesn't really want to die. And then there are people who are not complacent with living under the rule of a crazy man, you know, just for safety. But it was interesting because I didn't really get that vibe from Gavin before this episode, but just a lot of the things that he was saying, I felt like, wow, I feel like he is actually pretty afraid to die. And I felt like he thinks that the worst fate that he could ever have is death. You know, like he kind of mentioned the bat. Or maybe he's afraid that one of his men would die. You know, I think he really just doesn't want to fuss. He doesn't want the violence. He doesn't like that. Whereas Ezekiel, you know, his worst fate in his mind is like letting his people down again. So they were really on different pages in all of the conversations that they had, but I really liked that Gavin's kind of last few scenes were with Ezekiel. And that got a little fleshed out a little bit. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the notes that I have are just like, he just keeps saying things like, why couldn't it just be, like, why did you have to go and try and, you know, revolt or whatever, like, you know, why, I wish things had just stayed the same, and he likes to bring up the kid, like he didn't want that to happen, and he, you know, which I think, you know, Ben dying was kind of the driving force of a lot of people, especially Morgan, I think, to sort of also everything with Glenn and Abraham, but to kind of like switch over to really wanting to fight. I loved the line where Ezekiel said, like, I thought I was saving my people's life, but in all the reality, I was saving yours. That was, I felt like, really important for, you know, Ezekiel's motivations as well. So I really loved, you know, that whole dynamic between the two. And I liked that they did have a side plot to everything that was going on with Carl, but that ran kind of parallel. So moving on to Morgan in this weekly chat, the first thing that I will say, kind of on that level, is I said this in my reaction, but I loved the parallel between Henry and a young Carl, and how Carl really kind of discussed the idea that he, you know, killed that kid when he was surrendering, and because it was the easy thing to do. It's hard to be merciful. And that's, I feel like that is the theme of the season, or one of the themes of this season, is how easy it is to just kill and justify it in your brain like, well, they're bad guys, we're good guys, they die. And they've really played around with this a lot with the Jesus and Tara rift and stuff like that. What is the right thing to do? I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, which is why it's so fun to kind of watch the show really tackle this idea of in war, which is, I feel like this is kind of the only season that they really could flesh this out. Because even when they were like going against the governor, it wasn't a full-on, like, I felt like war like it is now. Do you guys get what I'm saying with that? So in war, what do you do? When do you become merciful? What if somebody's surrendering? And it's a really gray area, because the guy was surrendering with Tara and Jesus, and he turned out to be, anyway, I just went on a rant, sorry. But I loved the idea that we kind of saw this like parallel with Henry that was very similar to Carl, and you know, just even seeing what Carl was saying and where he's coming from, it makes you have hope for Henry. You know what I mean? Even though, well, I mean, who knows? So who knows where they're going to take Henry's character? But I think that parallel was really important to keep in the episode, and I loved it a lot. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about Morgan pretty quickly. I'm really worried. I mean, obviously, we know that Morgan's going to Fear, and we know that, I believe, that he's not really staying on this show. So it's possible that he's not going to make it out of this season. And I feel like they might be leading up to it a bit. They have, they've been focusing on Morgan a lot, I think. I'm really worried that Morgan's whole I don't die thing will lead to his death eventually, and not, I mean, I hope he would go out in some sort of heroic way. I really don't know how I feel about losing Morgan. I really like him. But then we would have him in Fear, and we're possibly going to see how he gets to his like clear days. That would be really cool. I'm not entirely sure. I'll probably try to do a video on that so we can discuss that more at length, the whole Morgan thing and what is going on with that. But in the meantime of all of this stuff, I'm loving the fact that he's like this one-man army. He's so close to becoming Clear Morgan again. I don't think he's all the way there, but I think like if this is the spectrum of like Eastman, after Eastman Morgan, and then Clear Morgan, I think he's about here, you know what I mean? Like he's really close to it. And I think that moment with Henry might help snap him out of it. The thing that I find interesting about Morgan is that it seems like he feels, whenever he's in this sort of clear mode, it feels like he feels kind of like trapped in that place. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just seems like he's so, like, he's like, I have to do it, I have to do it, I have to do it, and he can't get out of that mindset no matter how hard he tries. But if you think about it, if you're doing all this crazy shit to people, if you're literally pulling someone's guts out, which was like the most boss moment of the episode and great gore-wise and stuff like that, but think about, like, you just did that to a person. You took their guts and you pulled them out. You have to justify that in your brain. That kind of violence that he's been doing, you have to justify it as like, I'm doing the right thing, they need to die. And if someone tells you, no, they don't need to die, how does that fuck you up? You get what I'm saying with that? I hope that I'm explaining this in the best way that I can. You can tell he's not really clear-headed. He has a clear-headed. Sorry. Made me laugh. But I think that it's going to be kind of interesting to see if Morgan can actually get out of that awful place that he is mentally. I mean, yeah, like, I feel like a lot of us really love watching him be a boss and just running through people. But if you think about his mental state, I feel like he's in a very, very dark place. And let me know what you guys think. Do you think that the Henry thing will help get Morgan out? You know, there's an interesting parallel of, like, Carl saying, you put down your gun to Rick, and you showed me that that doesn't have to be the way. Is there a similar parallel that can happen with Henry? Are they not going to even delve into that because Henry's not as important as Carl is? I mean, I don't know, but I feel like that parallel was there for a reason. And I don't know. So let me know what you guys think going forward with Morgan. Do you think he's still going to kind of be trapped in that sort of this place where he feels like he has to kill? Or do you think that there's hope for him moving forward? Let me know what you guys think about that. Okay. Now I'm going to go into Carl. This episode, I felt, well, the first thing that I wanted to say about this episode, which I thought it was so refreshing for once in this show, I think, there was probably, some people had final moments. I felt like Lori said final words to Carl. Bob had final moments to say his piece. There were a few characters that had like a couple moments. Carl had a whole episode for, not just for, you know, him to say goodbye to these characters, but for us to say goodbye to him. And we are not used to that. We are, like, think about the season 7 premiere and think about Abraham and Glenn and how quick it was. And it's like, we were sad, I was crying, everybody's crying. I mean, maybe you weren't crying, maybe you hold it together more than I do, but everybody's crying or you're sad or whatever. And then it's like, but they're still in that lineup. Rick is still pulling Rick out, Negan is still pulling Rick out, and with Carl with the arm thing, and like, you're still like, oh God, like you do not have a ton of time to sit there and cry, and let that soak in. And even the next episode, it was kind of I feel like it was kind of nice that they it's like they were nice to us for once with our mourning period, where it's you know, we found out that Carl's bit, we had this mid-season break, and then we're watching this episode where, okay, we're going to say goodbye. And it was really dedicated to that. And I liked that it was that kind of vibe. What I have here, I wrote this, it says, Carl spending his final moments trying to make sure everyone is okay, is really brave, but not surprising. He only knows a world constantly drenched in death and knows what death and loss does to people, especially his father. I thought it was really interesting that Carl took the idea of dying pretty well. And I'm not saying other characters haven't, but he really did, especially for such a young guy. But then when I thought about it, I said, it makes sense. He knows that that's just a fact of life. You know, a lot of people we saw, especially in the first few seasons, we saw a lot of people have to adjust to the idea that, you know, they're gonna die, or that, you know, they're going to lose people that they love. It's hard to adjust. When Rick lost Lori, he went bananas. And it's gonna be interesting, by the way, to see how Rick deals with this in the next few episodes. So we'll see. But I think that it's kind of interesting that Carl was just so focused on making sure that everyone he left behind was okay. It makes him very brave. It makes him wonderful. But I think that it does make sense because he's just been he's seen people die over and over again, people he's loved over and over again. He knows that it's it can always happen. And I like that he's seen the effects of death and what that does to a person, and he wants to make sure that his people will be okay. I think that that's really important to him, and I loved how strong he was in the end. I mean, he was absolutely ridiculously strong in the end, and I loved it. The montage in the beginning I felt was like really gut-wrenching of him kind of trying to... I love that he planted a tree. I don't know if you guys... He like planted a little something. And I think it was an interesting parallel to the whole like put down your gun when Rick became Farmer Rick. But I think it was more than that. I think it was the fact that like this tree will live on, grow, even after I'm gone in the dirt. And I think that that was really kind of interesting that he did that. Just a question. Who do you think Carl wrote notes to? We saw Michonne's, we saw Rick, or Dad, and we saw Enid. I would like to think any of the people who have been there for a really long time, like I would love to think that like Maggie got a note and Daryl got a note and Carol got a note, you know, people like that. I would like that. And I guess we'll see. I would like to see Maggie find out and Carol find out, because I'm a little, I don't know, I like crying. I don't know. I would like to see that happen. I don't know if we will see it. You know, there's only so much time episodes have and stuff like that. But anyway, so now I'm just going to kind of talk about kind of the goodbyes and the final moments and all of that. So we have, the first one I'm going to talk about is Siddiq. I love the fact that he really wants to honor Carl. I love the idea that that is just the point of, or the name of the episode, and a theme. I mean, this is a theme that's always been part of the show. I always think back, of course I do, because I have a one-track mind when it comes to Walking Dead, but in No Way Out, Glenn has a speech to Enid where he says, you know, the people that you've lost, you live on, and that's how you honor them. If you live your life and try, and that's how you can honor the people that you've lost, which I think is always really important. I think that whole idea has a lasting effect on the show, and I liked that they kind of brought that back with this. And you know, we've lost so many great characters and so many great people. But yeah, I mean, there is something to be said about, like, you know, is it more important to mourn somebody, or is it more important to honor somebody? And I think that the show's kind of, you know, talking about that, which I really love. Siddiq being a doctor helps a lot. Now, he was a resident, so maybe he's not, you know, super... I don't know, Denise was doing a pretty good job, and she was like, it depends. But what do you guys think? Does that put Gabriel and, well, I mean, Gabriel doesn't look good anyway, but, and Dr. Carson on the chopping block? Do you think they're going to make it out? Are they going to get to the hilltop? When do you think we're going to see them again? That kind of did pop into my brain, like, oh man, we have another doctor now. Uh-oh. So that's going to be interesting. to see how that plays. But let me know what you guys think about that. All right, so the first thing I'm gonna ask, and let me know what you guys think in the comments. Which goodbye was the hardest for you? Judith, Michonne, or Rick? Please write down, and I'm going to get into it. All right, so first we're gonna start with Carl and Judith's goodbye. I love the line, sometimes kids gotta show their parents the way. It's interesting to see Carl and Judith's kind of final moments. They spent literally so much time together, and he's probably the single person that she's closest to, and I think I just feel really bad because she's just a little girl, and oh, I'm gonna cry. But anyway, I loved him giving her the hat, and as soon as I was like starting to watch the scene, I was like, of course he's gonna give her the hat. And I was like, because I think I thought of that like after he got bit, and I was like, is he gonna give the hat back to Rick? And then when that kind of happened, I was like, that makes sense. I like the idea that he said, you know, it makes me feel as strong as, you know, as our dad. And seeing Rick's face during that was just, it was too much. Andrew Lincoln is amazing. But I loved the idea of kind of passing on the torch to her. And I love that he also said to Judith, he said, you need to look after Michonne and Dad. And he said to Michonne, you need to look after Judith and Dad. But, you know, but he knows who is going to be most affected by this, and that's going to be Rick. I love the callback to Laurie. What I do love about this show is they do not forget about people who have passed. Obviously, some get referenced more than others because they have more of a lasting effect than others, but it was like I remember a line in like season 5 where Michonne was just talking about Andrea, and there was just, it gets brought up a lot, people who they've lost. And I love that they don't just like, even though it was seasons and seasons ago, they really go back to these really important scenes. And that is what I saw here. You know, we're kind of going back to Laurie saying, you know, you're going to beat this world, which to me is one of the absolute hardest scenes to get through for The Walking Dead. Just her final moments with Carl are really, really sad. And to do a callback to that, to now get to probably one of the next, you know, hardest scenes to get through was, I really liked that. You know, Laurie gave her life for Judith. So it's really interesting to hear her final words kind of through Carl to Judith. Does that make sense? But yeah, I felt like that was really, really sad. Moving on to Michonne, and I guess their goodbye was in at the end, but I'm going to talk about the conversation that they had where he said that they were best friends. The two of them were highlights of the show for me. Their relationship was a highlight of the show for me. I was not always the biggest Carl fan. I always knew that he was important and he had to be there. But when I was not the biggest fan of him, I feel like his scenes with Michonne were like this saving grace and made me really love his character. And I just absolutely, you know, I love that. And the whole best friend thing like really, really got to me. But I loved that in a really kind of Carl and Michonne centric episode after, which was the mid-season premiere of season 4. I really loved that episode, and I loved that it focused on after, which is a huge theme for this show. What happens after keeps coming up this season. And that really focused on Carl sort of coming into his own and Michonne kind of finally accepting the fact that she doesn't have to carry things anymore. And I loved that we kind of brought that to the forefront again, where he says, I don't want you to carry this. You know, he knows kind of how she became after losing her son and, you know, the people that she really, really loved. And then she finally put her love and everything that she had into Rick and Carl. You know, that really was kind of what happened with her character. And he knows that obviously losing him is going to be very difficult for her. But I like that he sort of kind of said, don't carry this. I want you to think of the good things. I do not want you to think of all the bad things. And that really made me really happy that was kind of a big part of their conversation. Okay, so now I'm going to go into that kind of final scene. Watching Rick and Michonne carry Carl was really emotional too. I thought the scene was beautifully shot. I thought the set was beautiful. I thought it was a really lovely, like I said, that this is like the goodbye that we've kind of always wanted. I mean, we don't want Carl to die, but like, that we've never really got for a lot of the other characters. There was a beautiful scene. He got to say what he wanted to say. I really loved that. I loved him saying to Rick, oh, I'm gonna cry. See, I cry all the time. When he said, thanks for getting me here, that hit me right in my core. And it was funny, I was watching the whole episode and I was crying, but I was like, I'll be okay until he turns and says anything to Rick. Like, say goodbye to Judith, say goodbye to Daryl, say goodbye to Michonne, whoever, Sadiq, whatever. Just as soon as he turns and starts to say anything to Rick, I'm going to lose my shit. And I did. But I think he knew how horrible it was to talk about the shot really quick, shooting himself. He knew how much it stayed with him to kill when he shot his mom. He knew that. And that was kind of, you know, that was a bit of something. Really sort of broke him, made him kind of into that kid who was able to, you know, kill that other younger guy that was surrendering. He just did it. I think that had some effect on him. That probably wouldn't happen to Rick and Michonne, but I feel like he knows what damage that does to a person to actually have to be the one to pull the trigger. And I was wondering about that because I was like, is Rick gonna do it? I mean, I'm sure Rick would man up and do it if he had to, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if I would have even lasted through that scene if we had to see that. I'm tearing up. I love, again, that he liked talking about it being easy to kill but harder to have mercy. And, you know, let me know what your thoughts are on that. Do you think that that Rick should kind of put away his gun and you know, honor Carl in this sense? Do you think that in theory that's a good idea? Sure, but you have to win the war first. You can't just put away your gun while you're in the middle of a war. Do you think it's good to have mercy except for Negan? That is kind of where my head's at. I buy Negan, buy. No. You don't get a place in Carl's dreamland. What do you guys think about that when you saw Negan show up? Now, listen, I loved, by the way, I loved the fact that Carl, his whole thing was like that it was his old man Rick was his vision of the future. I loved that. It was not something that I guessed, and it was just like a really fresh take on that, of all of the things that I was thinking about. I really liked that. do you think that, you know, that goes for Negan as well, or does Negan have to die? Let me know what you guys think about that. When Rick kind of said things of like, it was all for you, I feel like that's the crux of why a lot of fans are upset about the whole situation, is the fact that like everything that Rick did, you know, was really for Carl. So what do we have now? You know what I mean? And I agree with that to an extent. I don't think I'm as like pissed off about the fact that I feel like anybody can die in the show, but I do agree that Carl was kind of the driving force for Rick for, you know, the entirety of the show, so it is a little weird. I think that's kind of how I feel about it. Like, I just feel weird about it. So we'll see where this goes. I love that, because this has been kind of a running theme. Sorry, this is long and I'm trying to go through everything. A running theme through Rick and Carl's relationship is like when Rick said that he's sorry that he couldn't protect Carl, and Carl said, you know, your job really isn't to protect, it's to love. And I felt like that was always a running theme. You know, Rick was always really, I mean, eventually he definitely gave Carl like a lot more leeway than, you know, in the beginning of the show. But that was a huge theme for their relationship, was the fact that Rick just wanted to protect him and protect him and protect him. And, you know, Carl, like, didn't, you can't protect me from everything. And there was that really great scene when, like, the prison turned into, like, a hospital ward, that whole thing where the walkers were getting in, and Rick needed Carl to help him kill all of the walkers, and that was really, really a great moment for the two of them. So yeah, I mean, I felt like that was just really important that they brought it up. I like that they brought that up because it was such a huge kind of plot for their relationship. Okay, so that gunshot, watching Andrew Lincoln or Rick react to the gunshot was really, really rough to deal with. Andrew Lincoln's phenomenal and I absolutely love him. And I'm absolutely going to miss Chandler Riggs. I'm going to wrap this up. And the last thing that I'm going to ask, I asked a lot of questions during this weekly chat, so you guys might have a lot to write in the comments, but what do you think that the final shot of the episode means? I would think that that's going to be, this is what I'm thinking. Maybe some sort of showdown with Negan happens. And because we do hear him say, like, my mercy prevail my wrath, that maybe he spares Negan's life. I would rather you didn't, though, because Glenn, though, that's just my opinion, but you probably disagree, or maybe you don't. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about that. And what do you guys think that the final shot of the episode means? All right, this has been long enough. I'm really, really sorry. It was a lot in an episode, and I hope that I explained everything well, or as best as I could. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next week. All right, bye.